People have difficulty with this question, but it's not because the question's hard. The question is actually super, super easy. It's hard because there's this weird emotional element that goes into it. When we look at this highly illogical sentence, this is just a simple inverse fallacy. Even though we can logically see that it's nonsense, there's still some part of this that says, wait, no. But like, if there was no military, there couldn't have been any of those things. All right, let's talk about a little bit about why. And this is why logic is so important, why we have to rely on logic and not emotion. Since you were 0, if you grew up in the United States, you've been hit with military propaganda and military advertising. Here are a few movies, but certainly not the only ones, that are just jam-packed full of military propaganda. Many movies get money from the Department of Defense to put that kind of military propaganda into their films. Football teams are paid money to put military propaganda, for example, elaborate salutes to honor veterans and whatnot. They're paid millions of dollars by the Department of Defense. Those of you guys who are great at math, maybe you did math counts. Math counts is also partially funded by the Department of Defense. So you've been hit with military propaganda saying that the military is the best thing ever in the world since you were 0 years old. That's why it's so hard to think about this. This sentence, this question is really, really easy. It's just the inverse fallacy. If you have a military, then you get GPS. But if you don't have a military, then you don't get GPS. That's a simple application of the inverse fallacy, and you know it's ridiculous. Of course, there's a million other ways that people could have invented GPS. You don't need to have military research. You can have all kinds of other research. Telecommunications research could have led to that just as easily. Research in electronics, research, it could be that people who are hiking or exploring the world just want some better tools. So there are many other incentives and many other mechanisms that could have created GPS, computers, and the internet. Military research is not essential to it by any stretch of the imagination. And yet, knowing that, and you know from history, those of you guys who are history fans, that many technologies have been invented or discovered multiple times. Gunpowder was invented or discovered at various points in history, independently and separately. So it's not that you don't know that different people can invent the same thing at different times without even communicating with each other. But yet, this is still so hard to imagine. It's because you've been hit with that propaganda from such an early age to the present. Now, propaganda is one of the many types of persuasion. And how do we fight that kind of persuasion? With logic. Once we know this is the inverse fallacy, then we can calmly look at this and say, well, there are other ways that could have gotten to GPS, like telecom research, other types of research, exploration research. There are other ways that could have gotten us to an internet or something like it, maybe something even better. Advertising research, communications research, all kinds of things could have gotten into that. So what lets us see that there's a problem is when we see that inverse fallacy. So I want you to start to learn to rely on logic, not to rely on emotion and persuasion. Emotion can be influenced by propaganda, but logic is impervious to all of that.